Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Hank Stolz Experience here on Charter TV3. I'm Zip Zipfel, sitting in for Hank for this program. Today, we'll be chatting with Susan Coghlin Mailman, the president of Coghlin Electrical Contractors and Coghlin Network Services, and Dr. Leon Josephs, who is the chief of specialties at Reliant Medical Group and also chief of surgery at St. V's. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You guys are co-chairs of the American Heart Association ball coming up, the Heart Ball, Saturday, March 3rd at Mechanics Hall. That's a pretty noble profession for you two.
We thought co-chair would be a good way to kind of tag team, and maybe we could divvy up the work a little bit.
Yes, I certainly wouldn't consider co-chair a profession for me. My profession is vascular surgery, but we'll do our best to co-chair the ball.
So first of all, tell us a bit about the ball, and then we'll talk about some of the fine work the American Heart Association does. So
the event is March 3rd at Mechanics Hall, 6 to 11. We are selling lots of seats and lots of tables, and we have great sponsors lined up so far. We're very pleased with where we're at this year. Not that we're competitive.
But we're not sure that we're going to raise more money than the Heart Ball has ever raised.
And we're ahead of last year, so we're good.
Right, and now this particular charity is special to both of you. You are a heart attack survivor.
I am a heart attack survivor, yes.
If you care to tell us a bit about your
Sure.
episode.
A couple of things maybe. Really my motivation around medical school and then vascular surgery is relative to cardiovascular disease. A lot of cardiovascular disease in my family. You'll hear more about cardiovascular disease in other people's families shortly. But cardiovascular disease in general is incredibly prevalent. Unfortunately, more people in America die of cardiovascular disease than any other single cause. So that was a motivator for me both to go to medical school and then to pursue vascular surgery as a career. I thought I was doing all of the right stuff. I'm still convinced I do all the right stuff, but I have a very strong family history of cardiovascular disease. My father died at 49. Wow. Essentially all of the members of his family had premature cardiovascular disease. So my knowledge, I thought, was leading me in a direction where I would not have cardiovascular disease. Exercised very regularly, ate the right food, maybe exercised, some would say too much. And as a result of that, 2 years ago, while on a treadmill, I had a cardiac arrest. Very fortunate, largely due to the work that the Heart Association does. And that's not emotion, that's fact. I was saved because there was a defibrillator in that gym where I had the cardiac arrest. And there were gym employees who were very skilled in CPR and the use of an AED. And that's why I'm on this show today. So for me, yeah, there's a family and a personal and a professional reason. Wow. To not just chair this ball, but to dedicate my career to cardiovascular disease.
So genetics play a big part? Or,
I would say genetics plays a very major part in cardiovascular disease. The downside of that is it's not a changeable or correctable part of cardiovascular disease, but it is why we need to do everything else we can to minimize the other risk factors for cardiovascular disease.
And obviously, you were preaching to the choir, so to speak. I mean, knowing all the good, right things. When you had the attack, did you feel it coming on? Did it surprise you? Or
never had a symptom in my life. Was on the same treadmill the day before, doing the same workout. Still have never ever had a symptom of cardiac disease. So that's one of the frightening parts of cardiovascular disease, and not as much so in men, but certainly in women. It's very common for women to have completely asymptomatic cardiovascular disease. 1 out of 3 women in America die of either heart attack or stroke. So although you hear about it and you picture men with heart disease, it's actually, in terms of death, more prevalent in women, and part of that is the asymptomatic nature of it in women.
That's a statistic you don't hear much about. And you had heart disease in your family genetics.
That's why we're here with our Go Red pins on, although Leon
I just
has
have a
his
Go
Go
Red
Red
coat.
jacket on. But when I was preparing for today's thing, I looked a little bit about the Go Red Day, which I think was started in around 2003, so it's been 14 years. And the education and the awareness that's brought out from the Heart Foundation creating this initiative for women is making a big difference. That you can see the numbers of women, not that we always weren't focused on losing weight, but losing weight, exercising, the right diet, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is one of the reasons why I said yes to working with Leon on this effort, because I think that this is really important work. I think awareness and education and all things health matter. And there's so many competing interests, but as you just saw, 1 in 3 women, that's a pretty hefty number.
Crazy.
It is. It's a hefty number. I mean, I think everybody in our audience or everybody, watching today or that comes to the Heart Ball is going to have experience in their family. My personal story, my dad was on Christmas Eve in 2000, and I always get the dates wrong, but I think it was 2012. He was with my niece shopping for my mother, and he was at Shaw's Market in Shrewsbury, and he went down in the parking lot, and my niece yelled for help, and she was about 12. And a postal worker came over and gave him CPR. And he was taken to UMass, and he was 10 days, you're gonna have to help me with the right term, 10 days out cold. We didn't think he was coming back, and ready to make some tough decisions. And kind of all of a sudden, he started waking up. And he told my husband—
People who knew her father weren't surprised by that.
Correct, correct. He told my husband he needed a haircut. I think that was one of the first things he said. And it was a significant heart attack, and he was significantly, he had 2 more years with my mom and died 2 years after that, but years that they wouldn't have had with maybe more time together than he'd had before. The year after, Jim had a heart attack. I serve as a proud member of the Reliant Medical Foundation's board.
You were at a board meeting when that happened.
I was at a board meeting, and my husband says, the doctor's just sending me over to St. V's for everything's okay. So I sat at this board meeting, and I'm thinking about this, and I leaned over to the CEO at the time, and I said, they're bringing my husband over to St. V's, and he says, get out of here, go over there. And they were wheeling Jim in, and then they wheeled him out. Didn't seem like much time afterwards with 2 stents put in him, and like this. And he had some warning stuff going on, which was we'd be a bad ad for people shoveling, saying, "What's going on? I need that little purple pill." No, what's going on is heart stuff. So we learned a big lesson that day.
Great. We're chatting with Susan Coghlin Mailman and Dr. Leon Josephs about the American Heart Association Ball coming up Saturday, March 3rd at Mechanics Hall, as well as some important health tips for you as far as your own healthy heart. Stay with us here on this edition of Hank Stolz Experience. We'll be right back on Charter TV 3.
Welcome to We Hear You, our public service announcement. Today I would like to focus on some winter safety tips for seniors. Check in on elderly family and neighbors. Offer to drive if someone must get out. Clear walkways and handrails of any snow and ice. Plan ahead for any emergency power needs for medical equipment. Check supplies of food and emergency items. Check to make sure the space heaters are being used properly. Thanks for joining us for our We Hear You public service announcement.
Just like in baseball, good sports reporting relies on the bullpen. There are days when our front man just doesn't have his stuff anymore.
What is he doing? This is brutal.
I think it's Grafton. It could be Bartlett. It's a green and white team.
You don't have it tonight. You're done.
Son of a bitch. I f***ing have it. Tell me I don't
I can still bring it.
Yes, time. All right, that's actually Bartlett versus Milbury, and it's Todd DeShank from...
I'm just glad I can be a role guy here.
Hi, I'm Dale LePage.
And I'm Jennifer Ankowiak from Charter TV3's entertainment show, WooTube.
Be sure to tune into WooTube every month for local music and comedy videos.
And if you go chasing rabbits, try to race them. Stand up and be counted.
Interviews with local venue owners and upcoming events in your area.
It's your music and your comedy videos, all the events you want to attend, and all the places you want to be. WooTube!
Local news from Central Massachusetts for Central Massachusetts.
A Webster man is arrested after police say he stole numerous manhole covers. At least 8 cars caught fire tonight at a parking garage. If you hear the same noise in the future, the town says you should evacuate the area.
Reporters in the field. And an in-depth local forecast. Worcester News tonight on Charter TV3.
Experience here on Charter TV3. I'm Zip Zipfel filling in for Hank while he takes a couple of days off. And we're chatting this afternoon, today I should say, with Susan Coghlin Mailman and Dr. Leon Josephs, who are the co-chairs of the American Heart Association Heart Ball coming up Saturday, March 3rd at Mechanics Hall. And obviously this benefits the American Heart Association doing some really, really important work these days. Tell us a bit more about some of the activities the Heart Association is taking part in.
The 2 fundraisers in our area are this Heart Ball that happens in March, and there's also a walk that happens in May. And both of those activities are raising dollars to locally support efforts for education to impact the 1 in 3 women that are, die of cardiac disease each year, and stroke. Stroke is a big deal, and we haven't really talked about it a lot, but that massive effect. And I think that these events, these heart balls, will recognize survivors, and we'll recognize different physicians that work there, and we're explaining to the people in the audience and to those out there the differences with stroke and what happens there, and heart disease, and who are the professionals that take care of us at that time. Heart Association is in the schools with defibrillators and CPR training and first aid training. The postal guy was trained by a CPR course that brought back my dad. So
I think the work that the Heart Association does around education is where the life-saving occurs. So the key to good recovery after a heart attack or stroke is immediate recognition, because immediate recognition gives you the opportunity for treatment. So the education of the general public, and I think it's wonderful that the Heart Association, starting in the school systems, with getting into the schools to teach young kids what it means when your grandparent clutches their chest and falls down, or when your grandparent can't, in the middle of a sentence, be able to speak to you anymore, or can't move an arm, or their face changes shape. These are all things that you don't need a medical education to recognize and realize that something significant is occurring, because again, once these events occur, the key determinant to outcomes is how quickly they're recognized and the treatment begins. And that treatment can begin with something as simple as chewing an aspirin, or CPR, or an AED, or dialing 911. And every kid now over the age of 3 has a cell phone in their pocket. So dialing 911 is a pretty simple way to save a loved one, or a coworker, or a student in the school with you. So I think the work that the Heart Association is doing around that local education is fantastic and is life-changing for a lot of people.
You mentioned you were doing all the right things. Obviously, there's probably no one as skilled in being able to, hopefully avoid having a cardiac episode, but you still did. Is it totally unpredictable in any given human being as far as a cardiac event?
I would say absolutely not. I think you have to recognize that there are risk factors for us. Some of those risk factors can be modified and some can't. So the fact that I was doing the right things and still had an event doesn't mean you shouldn't do the right things. One of the interesting things for me was coming back to work. And the good and the bad of being a vascular surgeon in a in a lot of ways a public figure in a community
Sure.
for 15 or 16 years, is when these events occur, people know. And many of those people were my patients, are my patients. So they would then come to the office and I would be lecturing them about the fact that they need to correct their risk factors, that they need to be on a statin for their cholesterol, that they need to start their exercise program, that they need to throw away their cigarettes, get into a smoking cessation program. And oftentimes the question would be why that didn't work for you. So my look at that is if I didn't do what I did to modify those other risk factors, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. So the genetics today we can't modify. I do think that with some of the fundraising that goes on and the research that goes on, the genetics around cardiovascular disease will be something we can impact 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. But today the goal is to modify the risk factors that we can modify. And that will determine your outcome.
You mentioned they did have defibrillators. I didn't pronounce that correctly at the gym now, which was critical in saving you.
And they have the American Heart Association logo on those defibrillators.
Are they mandatory now? I know they have them on aircraft. Shouldn't they be everywhere?
So I'm not an expert on where they're mandatory and where they're not, but they should be everywhere that there is the public. If the public has access to a place, certainly in a workplace where there's physical work going on, they're mandatory. I'm assuming that probably where I was, which was not in the United States when this occurred, they were not mandatory, but they were present. And in fact, where I was, every employee at that business I was at is educated in basic life support. It's part of their training as an employee.
I don't believe it's, I think there are bills at the state right now that say we want defibrillators in every school, and I don't think that bill is passed. Now, someone will correct me if I'm wrong with that, and we can talk about it that night, but that's a big deal. I mean, at gyms and athletic fields, we always read about stories, right, where some young athlete goes down. Exactly. So, and I've been at the Heart Ball where they've talked about efforts to raise money to bring defibrillators into the into certain schools, and I think it would be an amazing effort and probably a great policy decision for the state of Massachusetts to make.
It really seems like a no-brainer, quite honestly.
Right.
As far as technology, you mentioned the kids with the cell phones, which probably have saved numerous lives just for the communication. On the technology forefront, is there any kind of an app that could be of some help in that kind of a situation?
Other than the apps that are involved with education, because certainly you can get completely self-educated around cardiovascular disease, both prevention, management, recognition, through the world of apps. I don't know of any app for treatment other than apps around services that will bring treatment to you.
Right. We're chatting with Susan Coghlin Mailman and Dr. Leon Josephs, the Chief of Surgery and Chief of Specialties with Reliant Medical Group, about the American Heart Association Heart Ball coming up Saturday, March 3rd at Mechanics Hall. We're going to take a quick break and be back with our final segment here on the Hank Stolz Experience on Charter TV3. Stay with us. Again, we're on camera.
You can't get Worcester weather from a Boston TV station. The sun could be shining in downtown Boston, but the weather can be very different here in Worcester. People tell me all the time how much they count on our weather forecast, and we know how important that is to our Worcester News Tonight viewers. Each weekday, we'll give you your weather, your 10-day forecast for right here in Worcester, only on Worcester News Tonight.
Worcester's only local forecast, weeknights on Worcester News Tonight.
Join Brad Kane from the Worcester Business Journal every Monday evening during Worcester News Tonight at 10 p.m. on Charter TV3 for the Worcester Business Journal's Central Mass Business Report. Catch all the latest business news that impacts your bottom line.
I'm Lisa Condit from the Hanover Theater. Join me every Thursday during Worcester News Tonight at 10 p.m. for the Hanover Theater This Week. Discover the magic of Broadway, music, and more at one of the world's top theaters, the Hanover Theater, right here in Worcester.
I absolutely loved every minute of playing high school sports and just the feeling of going into the locker room before a game and how cool it was coming out and the whole town's all around the field cheering, and it's just such a special feeling.
Played basketball and golf at Auburn High. I was the captain of both teams my senior year. For me, I learned a lot because I played high school sports when I was at Auburn High School.
I started back in March of 1997, and it was a lot different then. I was the only person in sports. We were shooting on VHS tapes.
I started in December of 2000. I was the assignment desk editor and the Health Watch reporter. I was also always a sports guy. You get paid to do things that you love to do, and for us, that's being on a ball field or a basketball court or just being around sports.
Our enthusiasm, I think, for sports is contagious, and everyone gets swept up in it. It shows in, I think, in our overall product in our sports, that everyone cares.
Welcome back to the Hank Stolz Experience here on Charter TV3. I'm Zip Zipfel, filling in for Hank today and chatting with Susan Coghlin Mailman, the president of Coghlin Electrical Contractors, and Dr. Leon Josephs, who is the chief of specialties and chief of surgery at St. Vincent's Hospital and the Reliant Medical Group. They are the co-chairs of this year's American Heart Association Heart Ball, coming up Saturday, March 3rd at Mechanics Hall. The American Heart Association, I would imagine, like most organizations, are always looking for volunteers. Is that the case this year as well?
Yes, and we I had been asked for a couple of years to think about this opportunity, and always knew that it would be something that would definitely be in the bailiwick and areas that I'm interested in. What I thought was really cool is to be able to work with Dr. Joseph. So I think many of us are asked to volunteer in different ways, and I think the two things, and I get asked a lot because I run a business here in Worcester, and I try to think up, does it resonate with me personally, and how are we going to have fun with this? So to be able to work with him is a lot of fun. To bring people to the table around these efforts educates us all and builds the coalition of the team for the next year down the road. To co-chair, I feel like has been, it's a shared effort, right? It's not all in you as the chair of something. So I personally think that was a great way for the Heart Association to come get us.
So Sue doesn't do this because she runs a business in Worcester. Sue does this because she's incredibly dedicated to this community, and people have recognized her, and not just this cause, many causes. And people recognize her as someone who, one, is so dedicated to Central Massachusetts and to Worcester, and two, is really effective. And when she commits to doing something, she'll do it incredibly well. So it's not because she runs a business. A lot of people run a business. She gets asked to be on volunteer boards and to help with charitable events because of her commitment and her passion. She won't say yes to an event if she's not committed to it. And when she is, she does an incredible job. In fact,
Thank you,
Blair,
Doctor.
you're welcome. Blair would say, he would tell you that if she weren't co-chairing this event, I'm not co-chairing this event, because I knew that the two of us have different skill sets in terms of chairing this event. And there are parts to chairing this that she is incredibly effective at that is not in my bailiwick. So we knew that if we did this together, we could turn this heart ball into an incredibly successful event for the people who need it to be a successful event.
Sure. You know, in talking about your incident, we're incredibly lucky to live in Central Massachusetts with such great medical facilities and schools around. I would have think that played a big part. Well, actually, you were out of the country
I
when
was
you
a
collapsed.
long way from here.
Real quick question, and this is kind of unrelated. Light at the end of the tunnel, out-of-body experience when you went down, anything like that?
No excitement.
No
None.
excitement.
In fact, the only way I really know what happened is because people told me what happened. For me, there's 3 or 4 days that literally do not exist. From me making the walk to the gym to me being pre-op for my surgery, there is literally no recollection of that. So I don't know if I would have been let through the pearly gates, because I don't know if I ever got to the pearly gates. So.
Maybe there's a signal there. We don't have to talk about that.
I do know, because I actually saw my cardiologist in follow-up yesterday, that what I can tell you is that maybe I didn't have any of that experience because I was treated so quickly. And in fact, if you look at my EKG today, it's a completely normal EKG. There's not a sign on that EKG that I ever went through, what I went through. And my cardiologist, and therefore I think that that's related to how quickly my arrest was treated. And that's probably why I don't have any of those pearly gate experiences, so to speak.
Did you change your outlook on life? Did you have more of those, I've got to seize the day and do those things that I've been thinking about?
I think I did that before, which is part of why I was where I was when I had this cardiac arrest.
Oh, okay. Where were you?
On Grand Cayman.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah.
So, but I think there are certain perspectives I have on things in life that are certainly different than they were more than 2 years ago.
Sure, sure. So back to the American Heart Association and the ball as well. What can folks expect if they attend?
A good time. We're going to have, and we're not going to, can I say this out loud?
I
We're
think
not
you
going to
should.
have a live auction, and I'm so happy about that. We're going to do some other fun things to engage folks in the audience, but it's going to be cocktails and a program and some inspiration and some dancing afterwards and a good dinner and great company and lots of banks and corporations in the area that have signed up to attend, and they're inviting their employees to participate in the event. So I think it'll be good.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
One last thought as we're starting to wrap up here on the Hank Stolz experience. You know, everybody talks about heart-healthy foods, you know, the little, can we believe in that stamp? I mean, for the most part, technically speaking.
So,
Or
can we
is
believe
it-
in the stamp of the heart healthy
Well,
stamp?
in other words, yeah. Are all these foods truly heart healthy?
So I think there's some marketing that goes with what's heart healthy.
Right.
But I think understanding what it is that is not healthy for you in terms of cardiovascular disease and how to avoid those ingredients is probably the right way to go. And I wouldn't just a little blip on the American Heart Association is it's really not just heart disease, right? It's cardiovascular disease. And everybody watching this show, everybody everywhere knows somebody, neighbor, family member who's had a stroke. And cerebrovascular accidents are incredibly impactful on people who have them and their families. And all of the risk factors for cardiovascular disease also impact cerebrovascular disease. So we shouldn't forget that as a significant part of what we're trying to work to avoid.
Great. Well, Dr. Leon Josephs and Susan Coghlin, continued success as co-chairs of the American Heart Association Heart Ball, Saturday, March 3rd at Mechanics Hall. Thanks for being with us, and hopefully we'll see you the next time around, and have a great night that night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That'll do it for this edition of the Hank Stolz Experience here on Charter TV3. We'll see you the next time.